All right, welcome back, everyone. We have Clene Inc. They're back to our conference today. They trade on the NASDAQ under the symbol CLNN. Clene is a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company focused on improving mitochondrial health and protecting neuronal function to treat neurodegenerative diseases. I'm happy to welcome back CEO Rob Etherington. Rob, please take the next few moments and tell our viewers a little bit about Clene and give us some updates, please.
Thanks, Anna. Clene is a nanotherapeutic company. We just released data last week with respect to biomarker data that the US FDA has been asking for. So just if you're unaware, a biomarker is, in the case of ALS, evidence of a damaged neuron. And the US FDA, over 4 separate meetings over the course of the last 13 months with Clene, and with one scheduled in the first quarter, has basically laid out a path for Clene to take biomarker data as part of an accelerated approval pathway for the consideration of a commercialization of our lead asset, CNM-Au8. There's still a couple steps still to do. The FDA asked us to validate and verify data that we'd seen in earlier studies, and they asked us to do this in one of 3 ways. Either find additional biomarkers, evidence of extra biomarker from the data that we have underway, or third, the possibility of new data from the Healy Harvard program. So taken together, Clene is decided to pursue all 3 legs of the stool, looking at the biomarker, presented this data publicly to the markets a week ago, and is now preparing a dossier of all of this data to take to the US FDA for their review in the first quarter.
All right. Are you want to jump into questions, Rob? Let's do it. Let's see. Now, based on the totality of the evidence that you just shared, which was a summary of what was recently announced next week's, talk about the next steps.
So what we've done is sent this in a meeting request to the FDA to really try to review with them the 3 different questions that we've organized. Now, first of all, I think it's contextually important to understand these 2 biomarkers. One is, as the disease ALS attacks the neuron, it leaves a debris field that we can measure in the bloodstream, evidence of a dying neuron effectively, and it's called neurofilament light chain. And there was a drug approved by the US FDA because of a benefit in neurofilament light chain a few years ago. ALS is a terribly its impact. Many clinical studies are short. And so what enabled is a pathway that we could look at changes in neurofilament light as this bridge to more data. In addition, the FDA suggested that we could look at additional disease-related biomarkers. And another one is glial fibrillary protein, GFAP, quite well known in Alzheimer's disease, less well known in ALS, but it's a structural protein in an astrocyte that supports a neuron. And neurons, as they die, again, and as the astrocyte dies, it leads to motor neuron loss. So what Clene showed is statistically significant data in both of these 2 biomarkers. And so next steps are, to answer your question, is we are taking, as I mentioned a minute ago, all this data to the FDA for a discussion, because the way accelerated approval in this country works, and this is the possibility of an accelerated approval as you continue to complete a confirmatory study, if you have a treatment. ALS is certainly that. And if you have a meaningful benefit over an available therapy on an endpoint like a biomarker that predicts a clinical benefit. And so the FDA asked us to show that neurofilament light, as it rises, is related to compromised survival. And indeed, that's the correlation and the concordant data that we're preparing now for this FDA discussion.
Perfect. And so is the company in a position to file a new drug application shortly after the FDA meeting? And when might that occur?
Clene is preparing the new drug application of all of the data across all of our clinical program and our years of safety presently, incorporating this new data, which we just announced last week, in addition to other data that we will be discussing with the FDA in February, and then planning to submit in the top half of the year. a new drug application then takes a number of months to review. And so the possibility does exist if the FDA aligns with this data set via commercialization in the last half of the year, shall we say this time next year, top of 27. So it depends a little bit on all of this data coming together the right way, of course, and not a little bit, a categorically important bit, with the FDA understanding all this data and concurring with the collective approach that we've shown, which is that neurofilament light chain and GFAP change is statistically significantly reduced in the case of CNM-Au8 treatment, our drug, and that those reductions are related to survival benefit.
Perfect. And if you can share with our viewers what the accelerated approval process looks like, specifically timing and when CNM-Au8 might get on the market.
So the accelerated approval process is a matter of submitting an entire new drug application similar to full approval, with one very important difference, and that is the company also commences a confirmatory phase 3. So as I mentioned a minute ago, we would do that in the course of 2026. That clinical study will take some time to recruit. We're building a study based upon survival as the primary endpoint, and that takes time to, recruit that study and then have sufficient number of events, which in this case is deaths, to show a statistically significant difference in the placebo category versus the CNM-Au8 category. In other words, a couple of years. So the advantage of an accelerated approval pathway for a uniformly fatal disease like ALS is that the drug can come on the market based upon a surrogate, in this case, the biomarkers of which I referenced. And if the FDA concurs with that, then gives the FDA, or rather gives the company, the FDA gives the company a conditional approval based upon the conclusion of that study meeting in the positive when it is finished. And so back to your point, we'll be meeting with the FDA in the first quarter to discuss this process, hoping to file a new drug application shortly thereafter, and then having the agency consider that accelerated approval new drug application process over the course of 2026, with a decision that would come in the latter part of 2026, or maybe if they take some extra time, the top of 27.
Well, good luck with that. Rob, are there any examples of other ALS drugs being approved and the market opportunity in terms of sales and what a projected market cap of Clene might be?
So presently around the world, there's only a handful of drugs. And when I say a handful, I literally mean 3 in total, depending upon which market you're in. And in some markets, unfortunately, too many markets, only 1 drug. And so this is a relevant question because the most recent approval a few years ago was a drug in a very rare form of ALS called SOD1 ALS. It's only about 1% of ALS individuals. So in America, that basically means 300 to 400 people is all out of a 34,000 number of ALS people presently struggling with this disease. So very small slice, but the FDA did approve this drug based upon the biomarker neurofilament light for accelerated approval. And the company that sponsored that drug is now doing their confirmatory study. Otherwise, patients have very few options. If you're the other 99% of the disease, in America, you only have 2 options. One was approved in 95, another was approved in 2005. So they're both older drugs, 30 and 20 years old, and there's definitely a need for new therapies. With respect to the market cap, well, another surrogate approval of another drug that was temporarily on the market for a short period of time, about a year. They were on track to sell nearly $400 million of their asset before they had to stop their work in ALS. And that company had a multiple billion market cap. I think it was somewhere north of 2 billion, from effectively nothing once they were approved to quite large. So certainly the opportunity does exist that Clene's market cap would grow appreciably emphasized if there was a commercialization approval by the US FDA.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Rob and Morgan. Thank you guys for joining us. And we really look forward to continuing on the conversation, and the best of luck with this important work you're doing in 2026. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you for the time, Anna.
All right. All right. We'll be right back, everyone.